Hi, and welcome to another Film 5.0 podcast. Today we have my co-host and co-founder, Steve Hiller, and I am Linda Gasco, or Gutchko, depending on if you want to be authentic or Americanize my name.
Classic Hungarian names.
Classic Hungarian. There's only a few of us in this world, so yeah.
Thank heaven.
Yeah, right. So today we thought we would talk about some of the people that we have worked with, directors namely, and, talk about our experiences with some, big A-list directors. So we thought we would start out with Steve today. And he had a life actually before me as his assistant. So I guess that would be LL, Life Before Linda.
LBL.
LBL, okay.
LBL.
So that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna dive into talking to Steve about some of these people, and yeah. All right. So, Steve, we have a list here. Let's talk about the first one, which is who would you pick?
Well, I would pick John Landis because John Landis was my first actual union film job. I had done a film before that in Chicago, a non-union film, low-budget film called Towing, where I was the PA on it. And I wound up being the driver for Sue Lyon. Some of you may not remember her, but there was a movie back in the 60s called Lolita. She was 13, and she was the young girl. She was Lolita. Anyway, sadly, I read she just recently passed away, but that's another story, and we all go there someday. But anyway, so that was my first film. But my first film on the union as a union, I came out on Blues Brothers, and they had already started, and I was hired as a second assistant. But when I got there, I learned that they needed a loader, and I figured I was pretty capable of being a loader. It was mostly airy stuff. The film was Panavision, but there were a lot of cameras because if you've seen Blues Brothers, there was a lot of stunts, a lot of craziness. So a lot of the cameras that were not primary cameras were Aries. So I was, I wound up being in the loading room. Now, John Landis was the director. I only knew John Landis because of Animal House, and which was only just a short time before that, and that too was a John Belushi film. And but being so busy on some of my early films, I can't say that I got to know the directors very well, and it wasn't until later when I was a first or an operator, especially, where I got to know the directors well. Although I witnessed how they worked, and sometimes was intimidated and sometimes not. But
I think that's sort of the point. Is like you at least got to watch them and be around them and see how they work. And he's a Chicago guy.
Oh, that I didn't even know.
Yeah.
That's why we were here. Who knew? It's only been 45 years. Who knew? So, but I didn't know that. But he seemed happy here, and what I remember about John mostly was that he was pretty hands-on and pretty active, and he had a pretty decent sense of humor. Fortunately, because that film was crazy, and a lot of the things that he created in the film were pretty funny, and I just remember, the little contact I had with him directly. He was very hands-on. In fact, I remember once we were in at the mall where we did all the crash stuff at the mall. For some reason, he was picking out some pictures that he wanted to see on the wall, like some prints. And I don't know how it happened, but I wound up sitting on the floor with him and this other girl, PA, going through photographs to get the three of us. And he had said that he liked this one, and I said, no, I don't like that one. And he goes, oh, and he looked at me and goes, you're so fired. And I go, oh, okay. But he was joking, but I didn't know. I mean, it was like, and he put his hand on my shoulder and laughed. But I said, okay, I like it. So anyway, that was my only real contact with him, except maybe in the toy store. Before they crashed to the toy store, I was out there because I was going to do Slade, and he was pretty hands-on, putting the right toys in the right place and stuff. So I remember that he was always involved, and like I say, if anybody's seen the film, they know how crazy it was, and it still, I think, holds the record for the most car crashes. And
I believe it does.
I think it does. And there's no CGI then; it was all real. And and I remember after we do shots that were, some of the shots were pretty controlled, like one-on-one shots, but some of the big shots that he would always make the rounds, make sure all the cameras were okay and everybody was all right, because there were situations where you had to ask if everybody was okay. In fact, there's one shot in the film where I was in a station. I'll describe the scene. It's under the L tracks in Chicago when all the cars are chasing the Blues Brothers, and it turns into this giant crash. There's cars
the pile up, right?
The pile up, and we had multiple cameras, and I was in a station wagon on the street, hidden because other cameras could see us, and that's part of the problem with the film. Cameras were always looking at each other, so we always had to hide and everything. So in that particular shot, I was in the station wagon with Bill Birch, the late Bill Birch. He was Chicago.
Was he operating?
He was.
Is that
operating.
why you were there? Okay.
I was.
So it wasn't a lock off or anything like that.
It wasn't really a lock off. I mean, he had control, but we were hiding But Bill Birch was the Chicago DP on the show, and Steve Katz was the normal DP from L.A. But anyway, Bill was there, and him and I were in this station wagon. And it's in the movie, you'll see it. One of the cars comes sliding at us and actually hits our car. Everything shakes, and Bill is always pretty calm. I spent a lot of years with Bill. I loved him a lot, but we just sort of laughed about it, and we said, well, hopefully it doesn't get any worse than that. And it really never did for us, but he was the right person to be with. And after that, I remember after that scene, there was a huge check, and like cars were flipped over, and there was a driver in all of them, and so everybody made the rounds, including John Landis, to see if everybody was okay. And the stunt guys, they probably had 100 stunt people on that show. It's like, but anyway, so that was I just remember that about him. He was very hands-on, and had a good sense of humor, fortunately. And like I say, I was a loader on multiple cameras. There were days when I was just a second doing slate for multiple cameras, and I'm not even sure why I was in the station wagon. I wasn't the focus puller. Maybe
that was my question. It's like, why are you there?
Well,
and they know it's going to crash.
Somebody had to be. Maybe that day I was the focus puller, because, like I say, I jumped around a lot on that film and never really had enough time to get to know the director very well, except for that one photograph experience. But I came away from it liking him. He's got a reputation of being kind of wacky, and things have happened. But my experience was that it was a good experience. Although I have to say that it made me afraid of the business, because no, it really.
Rightly so.
It really did, because when we did the mall scene, driving through the mall and all the crashing through windows and glass and stuff, there were several cases where, I'm in the shot but hiding behind something, because I'd do the slate, and then in the toy store I would duck in and I remember the toy store, I could hear them coming outside. They were going to crash through the wall, and I did the slate and jumped behind some racks of toys, and all the other people were stunt people, just kind of walking like customers, and they knew what to do. I didn't, except hide. But right when I did the slate and moved, the car came crashing through the wall, and I didn't even know where it was going to go. They did, I didn't. But so it crashed through the wall, and stuff like that. And then when they did the chase in the mall, the cars were spinning and turning, and they would turn and drive away from us, some of the cameras, and their tires would peel, and they'd throw glass, because all the windows were broken. They'd throw pieces of glass at everybody, and it was all real glass. They didn't prep anything. So, I remember there was one shot I was with George Kohut, also a camera guy that I loved, and I did like George Kohut, and we were hidden behind a bunch of stuff so the other cameras couldn't see us. But when the shot was over, there were big pieces of glass that were stuck like in the stuck in the trim behind us, like big jagged, like right over our heads and stuff, big piece of glass, stuff that would take your head off, but like stuck in the wall behind us. And I'm thinking, this is insane. Like,
And no plexiglass or anything in front of you, huh? No safety?
No. It was all, there was no time. We just did it. And then,
That's crazy.
and I just remember hiding in the mall. And, I can see the movie and say, oh, I was hiding there and I was hiding there. And, I do this late. And there was an Oldsmobile dealer where I hid behind there was windows and there was a little ledge where I slated inside the dealer and jumped down behind the wall. But it was crazy. But that's my memories of it. Like I say, I didn't know John Landis very well, and I didn't know him when I was over because I was pretty busy. But I did have a good memory of the show, so it must have been okay, except for being afraid, for being afraid all the time. So
well, you know what? That's a good thing to talk about just quickly is as a second, really think about where you're going to go after you slate, especially in those situations, and I've done a ton of that where it's like, okay, I'm going to go there. And a lot of times if we had stunt people or something was going on, I would check with stunts. Is anything going to go on over there? Because that's where I'm ditching to, So, yeah, figuring out where you're going to go afterwards is a huge part of that, Slate, you got to go.
Yeah. More on that film fortunately, it was never that bad again, but there were a couple moments, and I can talk about that when I talk about Tony Richardson on The Border. But But I never worked on a film that was quite that dangerous, except for maybe Backdraft, maybe. So. Yeah,
that would have been. I've heard stories about from the guys in Chicago that worked on that. But it's old school. But if you look at the film at Blues Brothers, now that I'm in the business and I see it, and it's one of my favorites. I'll go, okay, I'll look at the shots and go, oh, that was probably a 2C buried over here. That was probably this buried over here, or that was a camera with a switch that they could just roll from a distance, a remote. Because there was just so much going on.
There was, but a lot of the cameras were actually manned. I guess there were a couple locked off cameras, but I don't remember many. So.
Okay, so it's the one under the L that I'm thinking about, and then it's the one in the highway where they all are coming off the highway and they all pile in off. Yeah. Remember that one? And there's a truck and at one point there's a it's got to be in the car somewhere, and another squad car comes over the cameras. It's wow.
Yeah, that was all the state police cars. They all went out the road. Yeah, that was all of them with drivers in them. It's like insane. So, but we might have had some locked off cameras down below for that. But I remember being up on the road, and from shot to shot in that movie. I can't actually remember what I was doing. Mostly slate, in between loading and. Maybe firsting a couple times, but probably not very much.
Yeah, well, if you were the loader on that, you certainly had your hands full with multiple cameras like that and multiple magazines and, oh, gosh.
Yeah. I was very busy. And like you said, the 2Cs were the primary cameras, but not the primary, but for all the stunt work, the 2Cs were pretty busy. And then the main cameras for dialogue and scenes, more quieter scenes, were Panaflex. But I remember one particular scene where it's hard to describe, but I think they were at a place, what do you call the places where you sell stuff and put it on hold and you can buy it back, like a pawn shop.
Yeah. The music store.
Yeah, the music store where they were. It was a really tight shot of the guy behind the window, and
Ray Charles.
I remember the DP had lit this very meticulously with little flags and little cutters and things, and I kind of had to sneak a slate in to do it, and it was one camera. I guess I'd moved up at that point because I was doing the slate on the A camera.
Or maybe I was slating.
Today? Maybe
Steve,
I was slating.
Steven today.
I don't know. Maybe I was slating for everybody. I don't know, But I remember sneaking into the shot and doing the slate. And when I was leaving, I hit a stand, which hit another stand, and all these little things that had been rigged. And really, probably the most intricate shot of the whole film, and stuff kind of fell and collapsed, and I was horrified. But I remember Landis. He said something about, well, shit happens, and nobody got pissed, and the cameraman, the DP, was great. And he just, as I was saying, he says, don't worry about it. He says, we'll fix it. And he said there were things I didn't like anyway, or something like that. But nobody gave me any shit. But I was horrified. Like I thought, oh no,
yeah.
So, but the show was like that, where everybody was nice and it was forgiving. But that was the one moment where I could have really been in trouble.
Chewed out.
But nobody gave me any shit at all, so it was great. So
that's good. I mean, trial by fire, you were really thrown in it.
Oh, totally. So
and the fact that you came out okay and that people were nice and were like, listen, that happens.
Yeah.
We know DPs that wouldn't handle it that way.
Oh, yeah. He was. He couldn't have been but nicer, Kat, the director, the DP on that, and Landis. So,
well,
but, I didn't hear anything about that from anybody. Nobody said a word. I might have been teased by some of the camera people, but
yeah.
But like you said, I came out on that film. They'd already started. They needed extra people all the time. So the day I was there, the first AD from LA said, "We need a loader," and I said, "Well, you have one." He said, "Well, we're having, we need. There's too much for him to do, or something. We need somebody." So do you want to stay on? I was more than happy to stay on. Having,
yeah.
But I spent a lot of time on the set. I don't know if I stayed the loader. I must have, because I remember slating a lot. But that doesn't
well,
mean
maybe you were like in addition to,
Yeah,
like
addition
if
to, so.
he couldn't do it, then
Yeah.
you stepped
Yeah.
in. I've loaded 3 or 4 cameras, but to do that on a consistent basis and keep it
Yeah.
going, it'd be
hard.
nice to have another pair of hands in there.
We probably did. Now, the other thing that people don't realize back then, there was no differentiation between the loader and the second
Loader
assistant.
second, yeah.
Many times you were the same person, and
Clapper loader, right?
clapper loader, and my next film on the border I was the second assistant and the loader. So, but that was for the B camera, which was okay. It gave me
Yeah.
some time but I was doing both. There was no separate person as a loader. It wasn't until I think Terms of Endearment where I actually got to hire a loader. That was 3 or 4 films down the line. So, but. Yeah.
Well, that's also back when it was film and they were doing bigger lighting setups, and you can have that time to go to the truck.
Yeah.
After the
sometimes,
camera's
yeah.
set, as a second loader, that's when you would go and, do your paperwork and load and get things ready and then be able to come back, so.
Yes. Many times you had time.
Yeah.
But,
All right. Well, that was a great segue into your next.
The border.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So now back in those days, now people don't know this then, there were 3 camera locos in the United States, New York, Midwest, and LA. And one of the requirements that LA had was that if they worked in our territory and all the other territories, they had to hire a certain number of people from the territory. Now it's all one local, so it kind of mixed up. But so I was fortunate then, because when I was hired to do the border in El Paso, Texas, that was our territory, and the B crew, the B camera, all came from the Midwest. The operator was from Texas, first assistant, and me, second assistant / loader, was from Chicago. So now that was with the guy Tony Richardson. Now I grew up loving films, and I can remember hundreds of films that I watched in the 60s and 70s, not realizing that I'd ever be on one of these films. Like I said, it wasn't until after I was in Vietnam and the Marines that I went to film school. But Tony Richardson, when I went on the film, it didn't mean much to me, although I didn't know that I'd seen some films that I really loved that he had done. One of them was The Loved One with back in the day. It was with Jonathan Winter was in it. It was this totally brilliant hysterical film called The Loved One. If you get a chance to see it, do it. And then the other film that he did, and I didn't know this when I showed up on the set, was the Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, which was another great film. And that might have even been a nominated film, but it was a great film. And anyway, Tony again. I remember his demeanor on the set. He was always quiet, British guy, and always quiet. I never really remember noticing anything that startled me or anything. He would talk to the actors quietly. Jack Nicholson was the main actor. Harvey Keitel was on it, and Lapedia from Mexico was on it. This is The Border. Getting back to that, was a very timely film then and now. It's a movie that if you want to see what's going on the border with the Border Patrol, Nicholson plays a sympathetic Border Patrol guy, and the situations that occur that he has to deal with. It's a touching film, a brilliant film, and again, I met Harvey Keitel, but Tony, I just remember Tony was quiet. I never remember his voice, because when he would talk to actors, it would always be quietly and quietly. But again, it was a film where I never felt intimidated by the director, like ever. Like Rick Waite was the DP, and he was a good guy, and I'd never met him before, and we got along great. And I did films with him afterwards, including the movie Teachers years later in Columbus, Ohio, and but as the DP. But anyway, the film, Tony was a good guy, and but I just, like I say, I wasn't paying attention when I was watching films before that at who the directors were. I mean, some people are really into that.
Well, we didn't have IMBD then as well.
I don't even know if I was big on watching credits until I got in the business. Now I always do, but just not because I'm probably going to recognize somebody, which I do, but just out of respect. I just think those people work. Maybe if I sit there, somebody else will sit there and just give them the credit.
Well, right now it's professional courtesy for people
and
who work on it. But I mean, as a kid, I always stayed and watched that. I thought that was so cool, and I also was always hoping that my name would be in there too.
I don't know if I stayed or not, but I certainly never. I mean, like the names I just finished, The Loved One and The Loneliness of the. I didn't remember who the director was, and to this, but I just didn't. And even though I liked film, I think I was more interested in the look of it and the science of motion pictures, because I bought a movie camera when I was 14 years old. I just loved that kind of stuff, and I didn't think about the fact that there were people making these films. Like I certainly didn't think it was going to be me, but I've said it before in some of our other podcasts that somebody's got to do it, and if you love it, then it could be you, because somebody's doing it, and a lot of those people probably had the same thoughts that I did, that they'd never be a part of it, but it can happen. And I was older because I had been in the Marines and went to college, and I didn't even do my first film till I was like 30 years old. So, but a lot of people start younger, and a lot of them pay attention to that stuff. So, the business is available to everybody. If you have a passion for it, pay attention and figure out how to do it. It's there, and like I say, somebody's got to do it. So, but anyway, that was my first experience with Jack Nicholson on the border, and I knew him, of course, from Taxi Driver and all that other stuff. But was that? No, that wasn't Nicholson. I'm sorry.
That's De Niro. That's another guy that you worked with.
Another guy. I get it mixed up because I've worked with both of them several times. But Nicholson, that was a big deal for me. And but I know that he had done that movie with Laszlo. What was that movie? Laszlo Kovacs early on, the motorcycle movie with.
Yeah, Easy Rider.
Easy Rider,
yeah.
Yeah. But I remember from that and some other things. But so he was already a movie star, so I was kind of impressed with that. But Jack was very professional and and really focused. He wasn't somebody you'd pal around with, on stuff. But he was pretty focused, but he understood the crew, and as a parting gift when we left the border, he made appointments for everybody to go to this boot store. This was 1981, so cowboy boots were a pretty big deal, and they were making a lot of them in El Paso. So we all went to boot store and got fitted for a pair of cowboy boots that he bought. Ooh. And it's engraved on the side of it is the border. I still have them today. They're fantastic. But
wow, that's cool.
Yeah, it was a very cool gift. They were easily $200 or $300 a piece. They were really custom built. And
I should say that back when I first started, and obviously Steve was before me, wrap gifts were awesome. Yeah. I mean, they really were. It's like now it's like, what? We don't have anything,
Yeah, I guess they don't really do that anymore.
No. I mean, half of my wardrobe was things we got from films, right?
I got some great jackets on films that that people have offered to buy. Like some of them are, from the Coppola films. People are, like they're worth a lot of money.
Well, that's a great segue, Steve.
Yeah. Oh, yes. How did you know? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Segueing into my next film, it was a situation where the guy that I worked with on the border, Alex 2-year-old, the first assistant on the A camera, he knew Dusty Blavo, who was an assistant cameraman, going to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to do a movie called The Outsiders, which is a lot of people know about. And I certainly knew who Francis Coppola was, and after the Godfather movies, and one of my favorite films of all time was a movie called The Conversation, and another movie that people should see. It was a wonderful film. But anyway, I knew who he was. So I was hired by Dusty because of Alex, because they had to hire somebody. So, this was pretty much a one-camera thing. So it would be Alex and me, and I was also the loader. So I went to Tulsa and got there early and got to meet some of the cast and some of the crew. I remember going to a pre-production party with Diane Lane. She was 16 at the time, and
wow.
And we were in the hotel waiting for a ride. I didn't know she was, and she asked me if I was going to. And so we shared a cab, and and Diane Lane. Everybody knows who she is now, but anyway. So I was the loader on that film, and the director, who we're talking about, was Francis Ford Coppola. I like Francis for so many reasons. Now, one of the things that he did before we started shooting, and we had met, and he'd had the pre-party and all that stuff, but he had taken the actors out, all these young kids, and they're all stars now. And he had shot the whole movie with a video camera from location to location, and just gone through everything with a video camera. I kind of knew he had done that, but I mean, nowadays people might do that, but not. Wouldn't do that with key actors nowadays. But see, there were no. I mean, the only person that was known on that film probably was Patrick Swayze, but not by much. He'd done a couple
but
things.
You're talking about Francis Ford Coppola, and he could pretty much do, what he wanted. I mean, he's a well-known director, so if he said, "Hey guys, we're going to go do that," they probably all went, "Hell yeah!"
Well, they did, and what I realized, when I knew about all this, was that he knew he was working with new actors, and they were all young. They were all under 20, except for Patrick probably was too. But he figured by doing that, he would get them to know each other, one, and get a sense of the characters too, and the locations, and it was brilliant. I mean, Francis is brilliant. Everybody knows that. But
he is.
But on the set, like, interestingly enough, he directed from his motorhome. We called it the Silverfish. It was a silver motorhome, which blew my mind at the time. But the reason he did that was because he was recording everything. We were shooting on film, but through the feed of the camera, he was recording everything and kind of editing as he was going along to see what cut and stuff. But I mean, the whole inside of the Silverfish was like an editing booth, and this is 1982. It was like pretty early on. But he'd come to the set, once in a while to talk to people, and I remember one particular occasion where we were setting up in a car, and there were a lot of car stuff, and he came out, and the sound guy was Mr. Webb was setting up something, and Francis was talking to him like he didn't know who he was, and this is well into the film. And the sound guy says, "You know who I am, right?" Like, he goes, "Oh yeah, you're the sound." But because he'd never been on the set very much, he didn't know who people were. Like,
so he would give directions through a speaker, like,
through a
"Hey,
speaker.
you guys need to."
a big and a very loud speaker, and it was always set up where I mean, he could hear us because the camera was always pointed at the scene.
Yeah.
It wasn't rolling, but he could hear us, and he always had the boom guy put a mic where he could hear everything.
Ooh, that could be dangerous.
I mean, he didn't spy on us, but the
Yeah.
mic was where he could hear the set, and I mean, it could be dangerous, but I mean, everybody knew it, but
That's
the
good to know.
But he had this big boombox speaker that was on the set, and when he talked, it was really loud sometimes. And but I remember one day being right by it, and I turned it down, like, because it was ridiculous. And it wasn't 3 minutes later, and a guy came out of the Silverfish and turned it back up again. It turns out that was this guy's job, to make sure that all that stuff was working for Francis. And I forgot his name, but and he even introduced him. He said that.
I'd like to see his credit.
Yeah, I forgot his name. I'm sure he got a credit, but he introduced himself. He said, "Well, we know when you do that, so we have come to Francis wants it louder." And but it was interesting. But when he came out, and now the other thing about Francis was that he was very crew orientated. Like, there were times when while we were rehearsing or doing something, he would go to the craft service vehicle and make dinner for people because he loved to cook, or he would supervise a special dinner for people. He'd be in the craft service making dinner for people.
That's awesome.
It was a community that was very close knit, and I remember I was renting an apartment in Tulsa down by the river. There's a river that runs through Tulsa. It was a nice apartment, two bedrooms and a bedroom downstairs, because my family was there for part of the time. But we had a party there pretty early on, and I had invited, the people that I knew around the camera stuff, and then people got wind of it, and people started coming. And Francis came too, to the party.
Cool.
Yeah, I didn't think that. I was flabbergasted, and he was more than welcome. But I remember we were sitting out I had a deck that looked out over the river, and I was out there with him, and he's looking around, he goes, "Whose place is this anyway?" And I go, "It's mine." And he goes, "Am I paying you too much?" or something like that. But he was joking, but he was always really funny. But the fact that he showed up was great. I was thrilled, and I'm still thrilled that he
I mean,
showed
how
up.
many
But
people can say that Francis Ford Coppola came to their house party, right?
house party, yeah.
Did he bring wine?
You know what? He wasn't in the winery business then, but I do buy Coppola wine all the time, and I have been to his.
We've been to the winery.
We've been up north, and
Yeah.
but I mean, interesting enough too that Sophia was there, and she's now a director.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Sophia was like 12 years old, and he put her in the film a couple times. Like, there's a thing in a parking lot where she approaches all the guys in a car and asks for money and stuff. But he, he was putting in, his two sons were there. They were doing something on the set, and I remember coming down and having I had a Saab that had been weathered, and I was going to get it repainted, and they painted it for me, and when I went to go pick it up, I think it was Roman Coppola, his son, drove me there to get it. Like,
Oh, wow.
it was just a nice group of people. Like, and
Yeah.
he took me there to get it. Everybody knew everybody else, and
That's cool.
so I mean, I met the sound guy then, and worked with him several times after that. And then when that film was over, I'm sure there's more to talk about, but he told everybody that he was going to do Rumblefish, which was would take a little hiatus, and he wanted the same crew. So
That's great.
So Dusty hired me again. Steve Burham was the DP, and I worked with Steve several times. And Steve's a great guy. He'd been around forever, and he'd been involved with Francis on Apocalypse Now with stuff. But Steve's a great DP, and I think last year he was honored at the Camerimage in Poland he gave an honorary membership for his work historically, because Steve is he's a very personal guy, and he would always, he was always in touch with his crew, and always, you knew when something wasn't right or when it was, but I was very impressed with his work, and and still am. But anyway, we started Rumblefish, which they decided was going to be black and white because of the theme of it. So, excuse me, it was going to be black and white. So it was no longer Panavision, but Francis owned some BL cameras, some Arri cameras.
Okay.
So he pulled out his BL that we were going to use, and but this was a BL that had a big blimp in front of the lens, over the lens. And,
over the lens, not in the mag.
No, cover the lens. And in order to do focus with it, you had to transfer the numbers under the lens of these little strips on the outside, and then line them up so they matched what was happening inside the thing. It wasn't my problem, but it was Dusty's problem. But I remember that was a nightmare for him.
Doesn't sound fun at all.
It was not fun, but I know when we switched over, I know Dusty wasn't happy, and some people weren't. But Francis owned the camera, and it was a way to do this film for less money, and it was avoiding a big camera rental was a big deal. That's a big deal. So
whose lenses were they? His lenses as well?
I think they were. I think so, because he had bought a lot of stuff. I think, back in starting with Godfather, the trilogy, and then Apocalypse Now. That I think he used his cameras for that. I think. But
and back then, you could probably get that camera for a decent amount of money.
Yeah, maybe.
It
was still.
it
was only 10 years old.
Yeah.
But back then, already it was after using Panaflex, we were spoiled already. It was kind of a tank, even though it was a good camera.
It was heavier than hell.
Yeah, it was heavy. Yeah, the blimping system made it more complicated.
Awkward.
So, awkward. So,
But, that's like having with Panaflex having that. Remember, they had the lens heaters that you could put on, prime, and then what a pain in that that was.
Well, the heaters for that and the magazines, but
but the heaters for the lens, if you put them down and didn't turn them off and let them cool down, they would melt together.
Yeah, they got hot.
I was working at the rental house, and we get this box that came back, and I looked inside, and I was like, lens heaters, and I opened it up, and it was just like everything was just melted together. Like, oh God.
It was a lens heater. Anyway, now it's the container that it lives in heater. So but we started Rumblefish, and that was the summer in Tulsa, and it was probably the hottest working. I'm sure it was the hottest working condition I'd ever been in. And it was, Tulsa in the summer is pretty brutal, and I just remember it was terribly uncomfortable, and but it was the same crew, and everybody knew each other. There were some great stories, and Francis again was, there was a lot of times when he would be out on the set during that, and I remember because he'd always have a video assist, which was fairly new at the time, but I have pictures of him when he would watch the video assist outside. He'd cover himself and the things completely tent, just not a video village, but Francis Ford Coppola tent. It would be covered.
Well, like the old cameras for photographing, right? You'd put the cover over.
It was very much like that, where he'd be sitting there. There was no real video villages then, although we had video assist.
Did he just want to be able to see it himself?
Yeah. No, he wanted to see it, period.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. I didn't know if he was controlling it.
No, I think it was just because it was hot and bright outside. Okay. But it didn't make it any cooler. But now Mitch was the video guy who got to know. He's now a DP, and he moved up and became an operator in DP, and I've worked with him since then too. But anyway, there's some great stories from that film. And Francis, he made the show. He made it easy for everybody because he was involved and he knew everybody. Even though he was in the Silverfish a lot, he knew people, and you could joke with him about stuff. And I remember one particular day. Dusty was on the crane and getting focus marks or something, and Francis yelled at him, kind of joking. He says, "Dusty says it's not all about focus, and Dusty yelled back. He goes, he goes, yeah, I know you learned that on One from the Heart or something like that, which is, I know it's kind of a dig, but I personally love One from the Heart. It's
Yeah,
one of
I know you
Francis's
do.
film. I mean, I love it's a musical. It's so different. I reckon the music track is phenomenal, but I love that film. But when Dusty came back at him like that, I thought, whoa. But Francis, they bantered, they laughed about it. But he was that kind of a director where you could do that with. And then there was one night we were doing a close up of Matt Dillon, and Matt wanted to know how big, how
Where
the
the frame
size we
was.
were, where the frame was, and that's common. Actors usually
Yeah.
want to know that. And at this point, I mean, Melinda and I talked to actors, and at this point, I would encourage them to know what the shot was, so they know what they're up against. But back then, because the actors were so young, Francis didn't want them to know. He didn't want them to even think about that. And I remember her yelling, and like Dusty went like this, and him yelling at Dusty. No, he said, don't ever tell them don't ever tell the actors what size. He said afterwards, don't tell them. But I thought, I was pretty new, and I thought, well, is that just a common rule of thumb? But now I know that it's not. But
Right.
that was his theory with working with kids, and they were kids. Like,
Yeah,
Matt
but I
Dillon
mean,
was
give credit to Matt to be able to you start to figure that out,
Yes.
because that is helpful.
Yeah, I mean, Matt had done 2 or 3 films. This is like his 3rd or 4th film.
Oh, okay.
So he kind of got, well, we did The Outsiders before that. So
Oh, that's right.
He knew that, and he'd done there was a film, a prequel to all of those films called Tax, another Susie Hinton story that was done before we ever got there. It was not us. It wasn't Coppola, but he did a film called Tax, which was about that character in Outsiders. But and, I mean, it didn't. Not many people have ever seen it, but he had some experience. But Francis knew they were young, and I think his method was not to have them worry about that. Just
Play
act
the
as though-
scene, be the actor.
play the scene
Yeah.
like you're on a stage. And I think he was wise to do that. And like I said, that's the first time in my experience that I'd ever thought about whether the actors wanted to know or did know. But now I know that, years later, that they should know, and
Yeah,
if
it's
they
helpful.
want, if they want, it's helpful. And if they want to know, I'm going to tell them. So, but some of them don't ask. Some of them already know. They're
Yeah.
in tune to that. They may walk by the monitor and look at the stand-ins. When they come on a set, they'll look at them and see where the stand is and see what the shot is. So they'll already know.
Right.
But Francis it was a great experience for me. It was like 7 months in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We started in March and went through the summer. And but it was to my pleasure. It was one of my early experiences, and I learned a lot from him. Well, and Tony and John Landis. And like here I am, pretty new, and I'm working with these guys that have really been around the block.
Yeah.
Especially Tony and Francis. They'd really been around the block. And I mean, Tony Richardson has since died. He died in '91, I think, like 10 years after that. But I mean, I didn't even know that I was in the realm of these great directors. And it made my job easy. Did I learn to direct from them? Maybe, but I learned a lot of things about how set is run, and
It's a
just
big deal.
It's a big deal, and like the Francis films, the fact that people became a community. I think him showing up at my party, he knew that was important. Like, not because he was social and he liked that kind of stuff, but he showed up at more than one party as the films went on. But I think he knew that kind of camaraderie mattered. Not only did he like it, but he knew that mattered, and it
Yeah.
did. Because we all respected that a lot. Him making dinner for everybody was amazing.
That's amazing.
So, I even have a photograph of him. My son was like 2 years old then, and I have a photograph of him pushing my son on a swing at some weekend. we all got together some weekend for a picnic, and he's pushing my kid on. This is Francis Coppola. And so yeah. So anyway,
That's crazy.
I mean, that was a big deal even then. It's
Yeah.
a bigger deal now, but that was a big deal then. So
Yeah, but going back to what you said, even at the start of my career, I mean, I can totally relate because those first half a dozen films or first 3 films, you're learning and absorbing so much. And
Even more than you realize.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're right.
Absolutely. You're absorbing. And with being with those directors and DP and the people you're with, you're learning set etiquette. You're learning how to act. You're learning what's acceptable. You're learning so much. And every day you should be learning on a set, right?
Yeah.
And in those days, you're just learning so much. And it's also every film after that, you're getting a little more comfortable. You're understanding. You're anticipating. Your anticipation gets better because you're now in a flow, and you get to see how those directors work. I mean, my God, Francis Ford Coppola. I mean, that's a master class.
It was a master class. And he even said, I remember one day when I was slating, I was teaching a PA how to slate or something, and he was watching, and he said to us, he said, someday you won't need that. And I said, what? He says, what are you guys going to do later when we don't need all that stuff? And he's talking mostly, he was very big on having PAs and stuff. And I was like, I don't know. So then he said, I would suggest everybody to learn to write. He says, because he said, there'll come a day when this process becomes really easy. And boy, was he right about that. Like you could make a film on your iPhone. We didn't know anything about that then, but
right.
he knew about video and stuff, but he knew that someday that this would be easy. And he said that. And like he said people should be learning to write because you'll be able to tell your story someday, more likely than you are now. And this was like 1982 or 81, so he knew, and that always resonated in my head because now, like I tell people, if you don't have a budget, if you want to make a little short film, use your freaking i14 or whatever because the quality of it is pretty damn good. Just get a good sound person and. Now nowadays you barely need to light some of the digital stuff. You just you turn up the ASA or the DIN.
Well, or you get a bounce board, right?
Yeah.
For some fill, and I mean it really is amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And it's all about the story. But Francis didn't realize that there would be also AI.
Well, I think he probably realized it, but we didn't. Oh, I don't know if he did or not, but it certainly wasn't part of the conversation. Not then. No.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think we did one actual effect shot in Rumblefish where there's a shot where the fish are actually swimming in a tank in front of the scene, which is all black and white, and they colorized the fish.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it was the only shot in the movie that was colorized, but that was a post thing that they did. It worked pretty good, actually. I don't remember. We might have shot it in color, and then they removed the color from I don't remember how we did it, but that was my first experience with anything that was post. Anything that was after camera. Everything I'd been doing up to that point was camera. And,
and it's kind of nice too. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, really, it is the films that we've done, and I've worked on that have been just film, and there's no CGI and there's no green screen or all this other stuff. It's actually kind of nice.
Yeah, but you and I, jumping down the line, had done a lot of films with effects and green screen.
Yeah.
A lot of them, and but that's something to learn too. And
yes,
I mean now late in my career, I know how to light a green screen. Right. Because I've seen the best people do it, and
that's true.
And I'm seeing a lot of amateurs that don't know how to do it because, well, I won't even get into that.
No, we won't go there. But it does stick out.
Yeah,
I mean,
it does stick out,
and especially when, like you said, we've seen the best do it, and then your eye gets trained to that, and now when you're like, ooh.
Yeah, Tom Ackerman was probably one of the best of that. He really understood that process. And we worked with Tom Ackerman a lot, and he's a DP, and I mean he boosted Linda and I's career along all during the 90s. But we did a lot of green screen, and he really understood it and knew how to do it. And I learned a lot about that. But what I'll also say about working with directors like Tony Richardson and Francis was that not only do you learn some things, because the sets are run so well, you don't notice any issues. Like
Right.
it's later when you wind up working with directors that are not very good that you remember, oh, well, Francis wouldn't have done that. But you realize how good that was because,
Yes.
I mean, I can't name a lot. I can name only a handful of directors that I didn't respect, but there weren't a lot of them. But when things aren't going well, you remember how well it went when the director was running the set and you didn't hear it. It was just happening. And
Right.
that's why it was just happening. People like Francis and Tony and James L. Brooks, segue, did that, and they knew how to do it. So anyway.
Yeah. You know what? We're almost out of time, and we have more to talk about. So we'll do another podcast, and we'll keep talking to Steve. And I think we've learned a lot, and I think if you haven't followed along, you can always pull up your IMDb when we're doing a podcast, just because we're going to be throwing out names and movies and, all of that great stuff. So if you're following along, we talked about John Landis, Tony Richardson, and Francis Ford Coppola. Right?
Also, I named some films in there. The names that I did that I threw out there, I totally recommend them. So I mean, the loved one, Tony Richardson, is just brilliant and it's funny. It's a dark comedy, but it's brilliant, and I recommend that totally. And The Conversation, Francis, a wonderful film. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
And if you're a film buff and you're interested, or even if you're interested in getting in the film business, look at the old films. Look at some of these classic, because you're going to learn. The more films you watch and the more films you dissect and really pay attention to, you're going to learn, right?
And watch the credits.
And watch the credits.
And remember who the directors were, so you don't show up on a set and not know who they are.
Absolutely. No, I mean, we didn't have IMDb, but you do, so there's no,
But I mean, even then, I could have paid attention more. I didn't. But
yeah.
I mean, I'm on the set with Tony Richardson, not having any idea who he was, but now I know.
And it always starts at the top. So the attitude, how things go on a set, is always going to start at the top. So you can walk into a production office when you're signing your deal or picking things up, and you get a feeling right away for how things are going to be going the rest of the shoot, right?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
All right, so we're going to come back with another podcast, and we're going to continue talking to Steve about the directors, the influential directors that he worked with. So if you want to find out how to follow us on social media, we're on Instagram and TikTok, and it's at TheFilm50. Our website is thefilm50.com. We're also on Facebook at TheFilm 5.0. And if you want to find this podcast or any of our podcasts, you can go to our website, or you can go to Apple or wherever you get your podcast. So if you want to follow us and you want to like, follow, and share us, that would be great. So for this episode, we want to say thank you, and we'll see you on another Film 5.0 podcast.